So I've got a big announcement. The other day, Sheila made fried green tomatoes, and instead of slicing them like a patty, she made fried green tomato nuggets. It was incredible. Easily, easily a 40 to 60% increase in surface area for breading.
That's interesting.
Easily
Hmm.
handleable too. You don't have to cut them anymore. You just stab it with a fork or pick it up like a nugget. Incredible. I never would have thought of this. I don't know what she was reading when she came up with this, but I think this is like gonna change how I do fried green tomatoes for the rest of my life. Unless there's a recipe that specifically requires patties. And it's not like fried foods are the kind of thing that have been on the let's see what's the word. Fried foods aren't really like the knife's edge of innovation in cuisine. I don't think. I feel like frying of food is practically like that's where cuisine goes to, you know, kick tires and light fires. What do we do? I don't know. Let's fry it. And anyone who's been to like an Indiana county fair or state fair knows that there is an entire buffet worth of fried foods, like fried Snickers bars, fried ice cream, fried chocolate dipped bananas, fried chocolate encased or yeah encased or what is it, whipped cream encased in chocolate that's then deep fried, like things that don't make sense, and they're amazing. I mean, obviously you can't eat elephant ears nonstop. You'll get sick and probably die.
I mean, it's hard to even eat them once without getting sick.
Yeah.
It's just so much sugar
And oil.
and oil. Yeah,
So
I almost had one yesterday, but I decided against it. I think my intestines are thanking me for it.
wisdom got the best of you this time.
Right? Yeah.
So recently, I read about this is actually kind of a huge problem in China right now. A bunch of the oil, like food oil, human consumable oil manufacturers, have not been following the environmental standards, and they haven't been cleaning out the tankers that are used to transport these giant quantities of, vegetable oil or peanut oil or whatever oil people cook with. And so there's been this like run on all of the grocery stores in China where oil is just being bought up like nothing. Like it is just like it's gone. It's evaporating on the shelves, and to the point where people are buying their own presses so they can press their own oils. And now they're seeking out raw materials to press their own oils so they can have something to cook with. And of course, some heads are going to roll. A few minor officials are going to get penalized, and a few factory or distribution managers are going to get, well, they might actually get in trouble at that level because somebody has to get in trouble. But it's crazy to me because there's this whole domino effect of they didn't clean these containers. People are actually getting sick. They're suffering like respiratory issues and from consuming oil that contain like kerosene. But
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing stories about that, and I was like, I wonder if this is true or if it's propaganda. But that's fucking crazy that it's actually like it sounds it sounds way worse than the um reports I was hearing make it even made it out to
well,
be then.
it's kind of crazy because uh, from what I've gleaned, like the amount of oil that would have been on the shelves that would have been good for like the next month is gone, and they're not expecting oil because the containers were contaminated. So there's no oil coming in the pipeline, and this is just for cooking. This isn't like fuel oil or gasoline because they've got that plenty of that coming from Russia. But the oil itself is gone. So, people are buying up all the peanuts, meaning every restaurant that serves a peanut dish is going to be missing, a critical ingredient. All the other manufacturing processes that rely on peanuts, granted, some of them already have their supply chain secured, but not the ones that are smaller operations that rely on regular shipments of resources. And then it just spirals from there. Like, it's kind of amusing to me, the idea of like an economy like essentially breaking its ankle because of cooking oil. But I think that's just a reflection of how fragile these economies really are. As robust as they are, it's just another reminder that a supply chain failure can be disastrous. And we're not even really, I'm not in a position to know the full extent of how far this is going to impact, people in China. But I imagine it's going to be pretty severe because, no oil to cook with. Restaurants are going to be like losing business. People aren't going to be going out. It's actually kind of disastrous. I mean, cooking oil underpins, the entire like restaurant industry.
Well, I think you're nailing on something. Um, there is a dependency in late stage capitalism that when there's no sustainability in local sourcing, when a supply chain breakdown happens, it doesn't just affect one industry. And so, like you're saying, like there's multiple areas that are going to be affected by this particular supply chain breakdown. And it's so sensitive to minor changes like this. I mean, it's not a minor change, but um these systems are so interdependent that if shipping starts cutting corners, then eventually your food industry is affected. And now, on the one hand, I love to see people taking action and taking the initiative to avoid poisoning themselves by succumbing to the ills of unfettered capitalism. But I also can't overlook the way that this type of capitalist failure is not really labeled as such. Um, these types of breakdowns are purely capitalism. And the biggest problem I've really started to like focus on is the conflation of capitalism with commerce. And it's so necessary for the capitalist cult to persist, for people to conflate commerce with capitalism. And what I mean is, capitalism is not commerce. Capitalism depends upon commerce, but it's not the same thing. And further, commerce that is not seeking to exploit every angle and every aspect of the trade or any trade or the byproduct is then not practicing capitalism. So that's where you don't have to practice capitalism. You don't have to try to exploit everything. You don't have to take your byproduct when you're processing oil and try to turn it into fucking food and toys and like turn it into these other markets that you can't just figure out a way to do it without having all this extra waste and then trying to figure out what to do with the waste. That is not the only way to go about doing things. And now that these systems are breaking down and people are basically being forced to return to locally created and locally sourced things, even like oils, then I do think that these ridiculous cycles of capitalist consumption are no longer going to be viable on a global scale. And what I mean is, the capitalist cult depends upon everyone accepting the paradigm that mindless and incessant consumption is beneficial when in fact they become a form of entropy when there is no direction to their consumption. And it's unfortunate because consumption alone shouldn't be representative of a philosophy or a lifestyle, but that's what late stage modern capitalism has become. It's just we I feel like people have forgotten um when George W was trying to make it seem like it was patriotic to go out and just buy things and not even really be discriminatory about what you're using your money to buy. And in that time, he was like, here's some money from the government, which is basically just them taking the money that everyone had already given them and giving it back, but making it seem like he was giving them a bonus. So it's like the way people in America don't understand taxes. They don't understand income taxes. They don't understand sales taxes. They don't understand excise taxes. And then they don't understand those things over time either. So, like, when you point out, not you, when a person points out that, like, taxes were higher under Ronald Reagan than they were under basically like any quote unquote Democratic president since like basically since Bill Clinton. That doesn't mean Ronald Reagan was Democratic or left leaning at all. It is meant to highlight how far right we've drifted to the point that a Democratic president would not be able to propose Ronald Reagan tax rates without being labeled a pure socialist or something stupid. Where again, it's like it's all about perspective and like obviously the tax rates should be higher for the higher tax brackets, but because we've had a very impotent Democratic Party, I don't even call them impotent. They are neoliberals that believe in elitism for me, but not for thee, in the same way that right wingers believe in like white supremacy overall. And it's unfortunate because then everybody has to kind of try to find themselves within that paradigm. But if you're not white, it it's just basically lying to yourself about falling into that. So that's where I'm like, this is where people who aren't white need to not try to be house slaves because it doesn't do anything but make it more difficult for them to ever actually attain first class citizenship. Nobody will ever be a first class citizenship as long or nobody besides white and not even just white people, rich white people. Only rich white people will have first class citizenship as long as we have the two party paradigm. But poor white people don't care. I think they understand. I think they just don't care. And then poor black people or rich black people don't really have the power to change it. So it's like it's really only white people that have the capacity to change white supremacist in, infrastructure in this country, but the responsibility is always put off on everybody else, which it just keeps it and it keeps it drifting towards the right in this weird like status quo support. Because that's where I'm like,
It
When
reminds me that
that's why I
like
don't.
generational wealth is usually a product of, one generation kicking a lot of ass and taking a lot of names. At least that's the way the stories generally go. And when that person retires, they have, a son or a daughter who, assumes the mantle, and they keep that company going. And but if there's no one to assume that mantle, if there's no one involved in that, along that line of succession, then those businesses are getting bought up by, private equity firms and consolidated with other like businesses so they can make more money. And I mean, from what I understand, a lot of these private equity firms are buying businesses, that are, I mean, completely undervaluing them. And a lot of that is because the people who own these businesses are getting ready to retire. I think we're seeing the wealth transfer happen right now. I don't think it's waiting for it's waiting for some baby boomers to die, but I don't think all of the baby boomers are going to die and hand it over. I think a lot of them are cashing out. Because if they weren't, then these equity firms wouldn't be front and center on my business tab of Google News. And so, like, I think the idea of generational wealth now is conflicted, because like the assumption is like the ultra wealthy, when they die and they pass on their giant coffers, that's like practically institutional wealth at that point that they're handing over the mantle to. And that's very different from somebody who owns their own business giving it to their kids or selling it to private equity because they want to cash out. But at the same time, I think that the wealth transfer is also happening in other ways. Like some people are getting a lot of assistance for things like education and buying their homes, at least, if I'm to believe what the internet tells me. I'm not even sure if I can trust the internet anymore. It's like I used to think that I was able to tell the difference between like actual information and the stuff that's just really just trying to sell me something. And short of going to academic websites or something like Google Scholar, where it's literature that's exactly what you want, and it's not supposed to be giving you sponsored recommendations of any kind. I'm sorry, that was a really wild tangent. But yeah, I don't
No,
think.
man, it's so much stuff is advertising anymore. It's like most YouTube videos are basically ads masquerading as content. It's fucking frustrating and annoying.
Yeah. Like when I want to watch a tutorial video about how to do something with my computer, I got to feed through a dozen videos just to find the person who's actually speaking the right kind of language. Not just, oh, here's a bunch of information and flashing and animations, but here's some actual content. And it's kind of stifling now. But at the same time, I think that's part of what's happened. It's the same thing with small businesses being bought by private equity. The thought channels are being bought up by private equity. I can't.
Well, and that to me is also another sign of end stage capitalism or late stage or whichever stage, is definitely not, we're definitely not at peak capitalism when they have to do things like buy the thought channels. And a lot of it is them buying up political pundit channels, but also anything that gets potentially remotely anti-capitalist, they try to buy it up too. Even like, are you familiar with Boots Riley?
I think we've talked about Boots Riley before.
Yeah, and it's like the idea that Boots Riley's TV show got funded by Amazon on the one hand seems to undermine his anti-capitalist leanings, But on the other, it's like that's what late stage capitalism looks like. They can't help but try to even they have to go to every well fucking possible to try to make money, even if it means like, I guess we'll fund this anti-capitalist work and we'll pretend that we don't understand that it's anti-capitalist, and we'll pretend that it's actually making him part of the machine when we buy it and pay for it and we own it. But at the end of the day, the way he executed still didn't allow them to buy out his message. And I think that's something a lot of rappers who want to have integrity can't stay away from that scenario, and it ends up like co-opting the integrity of their message so that all they can do is sell capitalism. But it does take a lot to actually not fall into that trap, which is like, I feel like Kendrick avoided falling into that trap with the South Park movie, with the South Park director's movie, because it's like, if he had made that movie before trying to do this beef with Drake, it wouldn't have landed. And I think now, even if he goes ahead with making the movie, there will be more of the context laid for what he's trying to say with the film, so that it just doesn't come off completely aloof from the culture. I don't know if he's going to go ahead with that film anymore. They're still saying it's planned, but I don't know. So, it's very possible they don't, they just don't go ahead with that film. Like 2025 is a long time, even though it feels like time is speeding up with everything that's happening. And I think the Earth's rotation is like speeding up slightly too, so it's not,
So
that feeling is not unreal.
I just read something about that, because the what is it? Because the sun loses mass, the Earth moves further away, and then because the what call it? Oh, because there's less drag from the gravitational effects of the sun, the Earth is going to spin a little bit faster, which led me to the actual meat and potatoes. NASA has been developing a lunar time coordinate system so that they can have accurate timing between the Earth and Moon for, all communications to the Moon and beyond, theoretically. And it's interesting because the Moon is something like, I think like 0.0000057 seconds per second faster. Of course, this only matters like once a year, but but it was interesting to me because that's not the kind of thing that ever came up in any astronomy class that I ever took. Oh yeah, guys, the moon has a different time signature. Time happens faster on Mars. Oh, because of
I mean, but that's what all the native tribes and fucking Muslims and fucking basically everybody but white people have been trying to use as the main metric of time measurement anyway. So it's like, oh, thank God white people finally caught up to literally everybody else to be like, oh, I guess we can use the moon as a form of time measurement too. Huh.
And then it gets a little bit spicier because it's not just a reflection of mass. Because if it were, then time on Jupiter would be extremely slow. But it's actually an issue of density. Like,
Well,
the Earth
okay,
is the
so
densest object in the solar system, other than the sun.
before we get off this subject, one of the things I learned, like going and actually like talking to Lakota people is like they have like 13 months in their lunar calendar. I'm not sure if it's the same. I would assume that everybody who goes off of a lunar calendar probably drifts towards 13 months, but not necessarily. But that was where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That something like that would then allow you to have sort of, I think they have maybe 5 seasons to something. I forget exactly what it was that he was explaining to me, but it's like, I know depending on where you are on the planet, obviously that's going to affect how many seasons you have. So then when I like learned, I think it's Korea has 3 seasons, or if you want to call it four, one is just a long version of, I think it's long spring or something. So it's like everybody doesn't have 4 seasons. Some people have three, some people have five, some people have, probably something different along those lines. And definitely depending on if you're a solar or lunar calendar is also going to affect that. So it's interesting to then see white slash Western culture basically try to like justify ignorance of these other cultural contexts, but then claim like discovery. So that's what's always funny to me is like, oh, white people just discovered some shit that everybody else knew for like at least 5 or 6 thousand years, if not 80,000 years.
I'm kind of still mad
Um,
at whichever person decided that people who, you know, stared at the moon should be called lunatics. Crazy people should be associated with the people who looked at the moon at night. That's not cool. That's like discriminatory as fuck. Also, I've been reading apparently night owls have been performing really well on all sorts of competency testing, like a broad spectrum of competency testing. Night owls have been performing really well. So big ups to Gen Z for like showing that night owls have what's up. But maybe that also is a reflection of where a lot of jobs have been created. It's tough because all of the jobs and employment reporting is always, it's so nebulous. These numbers don't really mean anything to me because it's not tied to industries or even uh, as granular as a position. It's always just employment is up, job placement is up. But then we still have, crazy inflation right now, which actually probably isn't that crazy anymore. It's just inflation. I wonder how much of like one's memory or their ability to reflect on the past is actually the anchor that inhibits the individual from seeing the data for what it is.
there's a lot to that though, because it's like it could be a bunch of different things. It could be lack of awareness. It could be lack of desire to be aware. It could be lack of enough context. It could be the proclivity to believe in conspiracy theory over actual provable events. There's a lot of reasons, which again, it's like the
And
end result doesn't
I'm not
necessarily
saying
matter.
I'm not saying that we should disregard historical data, but how much of the interpretation of the moment causes, is where bias actually comes from. And then when we observe things in hindsight, things always are clear because we have
I
more
mean, they're
data.
not though. They're not.
No, that's true.
And I think that's what I was getting at is like, even for some people, when they can observe in hindsight, they still don't get a clear view of things. And I think there's like a lot of different well, not a lot. There's multiple different reasons for bias to emerge, but the end result feels like it's the same. But I think this is where the separation happens in that in the moment, the people who are biased, you can't blame them. But then when people look back and don't then remove their bias, that's when they can actually start taking the blame for not accepting data or not accepting consensus on what has occurred. Because this is where I'm like, I can look at things and in my mind, I'm like, I don't have enough information to know
Yeah.
one way or another. And then you have to like start figuring out and piecing it back together. And then you're like, I still don't have enough what I believe to be because it's not even about credibility, it's about, I guess, proximity to veracity. Like the farther you are away from something happening, the less you can verify how much of that thing was real. Because then, okay, we talked about last week how the dude faked the fireworks going off in his apartment or in his house.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because it's like, I feel like anybody who wasn't in that house or on the set, let me rephrase that. Anybody who wasn't on the set had to do some internal debating and I guess potentially external debating on how real they thought that event was until we found out for sure that it wasn't real. And once we had the confirmation, then we don't have to do that anymore. But until we got confirmation from the original source that yes, it was fake, it was a set, it was not real, that debate can happen. And so when we have real world events where multiple people were there, but also when things are being broadcast live, there's no definitive source of like truth in those events because there's so many different perspectives that are valid that's the irony of having so many people witnessing something is like, then there is no single source of truth. And whether you believe a single source of truth or not, at least when they made that video burning down the house or burning down the set, we can go verify that they didn't actually burn down his house because he's still podcasting from the house. So on the one hand, now we can go back and verify that this thing that everybody thought happened didn't actually happen and it was a hoax. But with the Oscar slap, until Will and Chris say that it was a hoax, you're still going to have a debate because everybody has their reality. And I'm still not convinced that there wasn't at least some awareness on Chris Rock's part that Will Smith was going to slap him. Whether they improvised it on the spot or not, it doesn't matter. Chris leaned into that slap in ways that a real person doesn't, where I'm like, that I've seen enough real unexpected slaps to know that like if a person just walks up to you like that and like fixes their hand to smack you and then smacks you and you let them smack you, you let them smack you. That's the bottom line. There's no other thing. You just let that person smack you. You put up no resistance. You didn't fucking just move out of the way. You didn't put up your hand to stop it, to block it. You don't have to be trained in martial arts to have a reflex to stop somebody smacking you after you've been talking shit about their wife.
I'm
Like,
pretty
it'd
sure
be
you.
different
I'm pretty sure you
if
have
you
to get
weren't.
training to suppress the reaction to get out of the way.
Bro, exactly. Exactly. Your natural survival instinct is going to have to be fucking suppressed in that situation if you know you've just been antagonizing this individual that is now approaching you and is not looking happy, is fixed with a frown, with an angry frown on their face, and they're walking at you. Your natural survival instinct is not just going to sit there and wait for them to fucking raise their hand and go ahead and finish the swing and then be like, wow, I can't believe that just happened. What the fuck do you mean you can't believe that just happened? You just antagonized this man and his wife and watched him walk up a fucking goddamn catwalk and fucking just, he didn't run, he walked. He strutted. He strutted for like 10 seconds. He walked like goddamn a man who was about to smack the shit out of somebody.
Yeah, he was
Knowing
channeling
damn well
like
he was gonna connect.
he was channeling like Mike Lowry that entire
Yeah,
walk.
he was. This was a character. This was where I'm like, no, this is not Will Smith. This is the Fresh Prince. This is Mike Lowry. This is not Will Smith, because Will Smith cares too much about what people think about him to do this, and he's a disciplined enough man that Chris fucking Rock, of all people, talking shit about your wife isn't actually gonna piss you off enough for you to actually strike this man on fucking live television. No fucking way. No fucking way. No goddamn way in hell. Because the thing about it is, like, I see Eminem right now attacking trans people in his songs that nobody's really listening to except for Eminem stans. And trans people aren't like trying to hunt him down and like run up on him and fucking attack him, because they're just rolling their eyes like, oh, this grandpa wants attention. This fucking 51-year-old man is begging for attention. So he's like trying to make us give him attention by talking about us. And all we have to do is ignore it. And that's what they're doing. So like the idea that like Will Smith, who has one of the best fucking careers in acting history, let alone the fact that he started off as a fucking musician and transitioned into acting and became one of the most successful actors of all time, who also then married one of the people who was the object of a lot of people's fantasies in lay people and in stardom, like Tupac and Chris Rock are well, and other people are like well known to have been trying to get with Jada Pinkett, like Bill Bellamy, fucking anybody who basically put her in a movie was trying to get with her and couldn't like be Will Smith. So like the idea that Chris Rock, who we know for a fact he wanted to get with Jada Pinkett Smith, is like sitting up there talking shit about her, just cooning his ass off for these fucking white people to try to like bring down Jada and Will. Like, does anybody really think Will Smith felt like at the moment Chris Rock was like getting the upper hand? I don't think so. Everybody in that room was like laughing along, maybe for sympathy for Chris Rock, knowing damn well G.I. Jane is a dated ass reference, and you gotta be like 45 old plus. Maybe if you're 40, you might get that reference, but like nobody's getting that reference. So that's a real sympathy laugh in the first place. Anybody really thinks Will Smith is sitting there like, oh, because the thing about the
Did we lose you?
Will Smith was fucking Margot Robbie. I know everybody knows that Will Smith was fucking Margot Robbie. So like, get mad at Jada Pinkett Smith for talking to Will Smith publicly about August Alsina when we all know damn well him and Margot Robbie was making macaroni sounds, getting fucking tattoos together, taking pictures together like they're fucking teenagers in love and shit. I mean, everybody saw that. So this is not like we can't. They had something. They had their understanding. The only difference I think with the Margot Robbie and versus August Alsina is like we got a very clear insight into it because they had a discussion about it, which is where I'm like, yeah, he sat up there and cried, but I'm like, I don't know anybody who can sit there and hear that and not like get emotional, even if they're okay with it. But it's like the only reason he can like sit there and deal with it is because he knows in the back of his head he was fucking the shit out of Margot Robbie. So like, why is anybody really thinking that he's upset over Chris Rock? Like, and really to the point that he's gonna like sacrifice not only his career, he could have went to fucking jail. He could have went. Everybody saw it. The police were trying to take that motherfucker to jail, and everybody was like, "Nah, we're not like, we don't want to break the kayfabe, but no, we're not pressing charges. We're not gonna give you a reason why we're not pressing charges. No charges need to be brought. It's all cool. This motherfucker at an after party the same night. No, that was not real. That was not real. It was as real as the time fucking Howard Stern farted on Eminem's face. That wasn't real either. I know motherfuckers still think that shit was real. Or the time Eminem got mad and punched out, Triumph the dog. Motherfuckers still think Eminem punched a goddamn hand puppet.
So some really creative person on Redbubble created a Will Smith Margot Robbie poster that you can purchase for $10.49. It's a 16 by 0.4 by 16.4 inch semi-gloss print.
And see, that's where I'm like, anybody who has two fucking brain cells together can like deduce that like, yeah, him and Margot Robbie were like head over heels for each other, but like in a, yeah, we both fuck a lot of people way, and this is not gonna last. Like, we're not trying to like get married to each other. We're just like gonna fuck a whole lot and then like pretend that we didn't and get tattoos of each other.
Wait, where were they
with each other and like laugh about it? And
where
like,
did they find a functional photo booth?
Right, you know what I'm saying, bro? Come on, what? You gotta seek that. You gotta be on like some weird obscure niche date for that kind of shit where I'm like, I know it wasn't like the photo booth app because you can see it's like a very tight space. It's not like an app. So it's like, where were y'all at doing a fucking photo booth shoot? Oh, out getting tattoos together. Oh, that. Yeah, okay. But then we're going to act like he's really upset that Jada Pinkett. The biggest problem with the August Alsina shit was that it was Jaden's friend. That's why it was an issue. It wasn't the fact that she was fucking him. It was the fact that it was Jaden's friend. And it was a whole lot of lines crossed in that where I'm like, it were by their own discussion, because I didn't even watch you didn't even have to watch it. So many people were obsessed with it that you saw the entire interview through snippets, through memes. Everybody at the time, like I said, trying to make fun of Will Smith for crying, for hearing it, knowing, like I said, knowing damn well in the back of their minds that him and Margot Robbie was just like, it wasn't publicly embarrassing Jada, but anybody who just like saw anything, like, yeah, if you don't understand that like their relationship was like clearly an open relationship, or that it was one of those Hollywood Ben Affleck, J Lo were just doing this for marketing or to pretend that, I don't know, that we're normal people who do things like get married. Like, whatever anybody thought that marriage was, it wasn't. So in the process, trying to then make fun of Will Smith, it's like, yeah, I guess you can make fun of him in the moment for crying, but like eventually I think a lot of people realize like in that exchange, Jada was like the toxic one. Jada was like, it was very toxic what she did, not to Will, to her fucking son. Like, if you're parents and you want to have that weird like dynamic between the two, you shouldn't get your kids involved, because then that gets weird. That gets real weird, and that's why that shit was weird. Not even because she fucked August Alsina. So that's why I'm like, I think a lot of people want to, especially the people who wanted Jada Pinkett Smith in their minds anyway. It's like you got a lot of dudes who grew up fantasizing that they would ever have a chance with her, and then her fucking August Alsina and making Will Smith cry to them was like, at least she made Will Smith feel like shit. And it's like a win for them, even though like they never obviously had a chance with Jada. And so there's something about the way that celebrities are presented that gives people this notion of like a parasocial possibility of ever hooking up with them, that then causes these weird reactions where, again, the only reason anybody could believe that Will Smith would ever actually be mad enough at what Chris Rock was doing to actually slap him and it wasn't being a bit for the Oscars was if they actually really deep down wanted Jada Pinkett Smith for themselves and were just wanting to like hate on Will Smith, and then are just going to pretend that it didn't look fucking fake. And I don't think they really believe that. I think they're just saying that publicly to make Will Smith look bad, because that's the only thing that they can get in the form of like even a remote win of like ever getting with Jada Pinkett Smith in their minds. It's like, and I only say it that way because like I grew up seeing people in these like parasocial romances where I can understand where it's like, okay, if you're a teenager, male or female, and you're like obsessed with a teenage artist, and you're like, oh my God, I want to get with this person. But in saying that, it's not like you're not really in your mind thinking that you're ever going to actually like marry this person. It's just like these kids know that it's a fantasy when they're saying it and when they're doing it, and like even in their constructions and like being obsessed, it's like I think a teenager would rather do that for a famous teenager rather than the kid in the like. You can't do that about the kid in your fucking school without being a fucking weirdo. It's not like it's way less weird for teenagers to do that about famous teenagers than to do that about kids in their own school. And so whether they do it consciously or not, I think they're redirecting a lot of their like if you're a teenager and this is like your first time being around people you're like your own age, and you're also like you've never been in a relationship or never been in like any sort of romantic like connection, you don't know what to do with that energy, and like redirecting it towards like, and it won't even necessarily be a teenager. It will sometimes be like an adult. And so this is where I think a lot of times the adults know that that's happening, and then they take the responsibility, and then they don't prey upon that because it's so obviously not real that they're aware enough. I mean, and they're not predators. So it's like they would never even think about it, let alone like it's not even something that comes across. Whereas like then you get people like Drake who clearly, when he's doing this shit on stage and bringing the like teenagers on stage and like allowing it to go further for them than the fantasy of being in the crowd and like having that parasocial romance that never crosses that border, it's fucking up other people's perceptions of that, but also the people who are involved. And so I think that's where like the things that we grew up with in the forms of parasocial romances as teenagers become way different when teenagers can go to concerts and teenagers can have social media accounts and like connect with these people, because then you have the predators who don't respect that like there needs to be that outlet for teenagers so they don't end up turning it on their like local people and getting super weird about it. So I like, you need the Beatles so teenage girls can go there and faint, and you need Janet Jackson so teenage boys can like direct all of their angst at a woman who they're never ever even going to be in the same room with. So like those things have a function in a repressed society. Like, not to say that society needs to be repressed, but knowing how sexually repressed American society is, I do see like growing up the benefit of like being able, like, you don't want to promote objectification of anybody, let alone like objectification for the like for sexuality. It's more so when it can be redirected and not be as blatant. Then you have people with like posters on their wall of like comic books or comic book covers, and like, yeah, Rogue may be a little extra thick, but at least it's not like objectifying a real human. And so there's like stages of redirecting the energy that comes with being in a repressed society that have positive outcomes, where then like again that energy doesn't get turned towards like people in their local, like their local group. But in the era of technology, it then opens up this avenue for predators. And I think we're just finally getting to a point where people can like start to discern. Sometimes when people do shit in public, it's to hide the obvious in plain sight, so it doesn't, it's like, oh, this can't be bad if he's doing it on stage. And it's like, I don't know if you remember pre Super Bowl nipple incident, but Janet Jackson's performances on stage were basically X-rated, not triple X, at least NC-17. At least NC-17, but closer, I would say closer to X, knowing that it's like, it's not even about nudity so much as like, no, she's full on performing um like pseudo sex on it would always be one audience member per show. No, I don't think was ever more than one, but they would bring somebody on stage, not always a dude. It was not always a dude either. And they would basically like strap them to I think it was like a cross. I don't think it was a cross like a religious symbol, but it might have been like an X. I'm sure there's videos of it, but this was like every show. So it wasn't, something she would break out ever so often. This was like, no, Janet Jackson was in her full on, I'm going to outdo Madonna in my freak era. And the nipple incident basically halted all of that, which is insane that like America was on. I feel like Janet Jackson could have brought world peace if she had just performed enough shows and like had that parasocial, like if every person who was like a male that was not in a relationship had the idea that they could go to a Janet Jackson show and be that fan, she might have brought world peace just performing. But because like Justin Timberlake showed her nipple and then all the conservative women lost their shit, and basically like it was conservative women that got Janet Jackson out of her public freak era, that put us on a completely different trajectory. It's like, I feel like America was on this path to actual sexual liberation in the form of sexual liberation isn't about promiscuity at all. That's not what sexual liberation is about. And when you have somebody who represents what is, and I think this is also why somebody like Madonna was sort of challenging the status quo, but in doing that she got wrapped up in that being the only thing that ever got anybody's attention, and so then it became like a gimmick. And so you couldn't really take Madonna seriously about sexual liberation because she clearly became edgelord, I'm gonna just do shock value, whatever. And so then it's not even about sexual liberation anymore. It's about shock value through sex. So when we have somebody in the form of Janet Jackson who grew up in the public eye and is also healthily liberating herself sexually and also encouraging other people to do it, it completely was a challenge to the repressed status quo of the Christian right. And then I just don't know if Justin Timberlake hadn't done that, what America would, I feel like we'd be in a completely different America. And I'm not even trying to be funny in that if people weren't around before the nipple and after the nipple, it's like as impactful, if not more impactful than 9/11. And that's why I'm like, again, I'm not even trying to be funny, but they changed broadcast standards because of the nipple. Like they no longer allowed live television. They have like a 13-second delay. That's not because of fucking death. That's not because of violence. That's because of one nipple, not two nipples, just one nipple changed how television is broadcast forever. And I wish I was exaggerating. Like, I wish that one nipple did not change live, like the fact that television is no longer live. So that's why Fast forward, they could have not broadcast that slap because it's no longer live. Live broadcast is no longer live because of Janet Jackson's nipple. Full circle twice. So they didn't have to show the fucking slap if they didn't want to. They could have cut. They had 7 to 13 seconds to cut away from the fucking slap. They had 7 to 13 seconds to cut away from the shot. They didn't have to show the shot. They don't have to show anything because none of it is live. None of it is live anymore because of Janet Jackson's nipple. Which is like, whoa. I know when people heard me be like, oh, we got a sexual revolution averted when Janet Jackson stopped performing. They're like, this motherfucker's crazy. But now that you realize that what I'm saying is completely accurate in terms of like the way that live television is affected because of her nipple, it don't sound so crazy, but also like the idea that America is so repressed that a nipple can make hundreds of millions of people who didn't even see it. Let's be real. Most of the
people had to go out and buy pearls to clutch after that incident.
Right. They didn't see it. The same shit with the slap. Nobody was watching that shit live. This is where we know for a fact that no more than what was it? I think it was like 6 million or something. They have the like estimates on how many people watch the Oscars live. Nobody was watching that shit. Fuck out of here. Nobody was watching that shit live. And so then the next day when people ran the video, or in the same night, I guess, that's when everybody found out about it. Because everybody was doing some other shit. Nobody fucking cares about no fucking Oscars except the goddamn actors. And then a bunch of people who have parasocial relationships with the people getting Oscars. Those are the only people who give a fuck. So that, again, this is where anybody who was watching already had a parasocial relationship with anybody participating. So we're already talking about fucking weirdos in the form of adults who continued the parasocial relationships that are supposed to be left behind as teenagers. And so this is where I'm not saying all this stuff just to be like, oh, dig it, like people who have parasocial relationships. It's like, no, parasocial relationships have a purpose. They're meant to be an outlet. They're not meant to be something that then continue to be held, because then that moves on to stalking. Like stalking is when parasocial relationships continue into adulthood and they get more intense and they don't get left behind. Like somebody who follows somebody on tour is one step away from a stalker. And I would assert that they already are, but it's accepted in capitalism because you need these parasocial relationships for that type of fandom. And anymore, that type of fandom is the only thing that capitalism can sell with, like any sort of creative. It don't matter if you're an actor or a musician or like a graphic artist. They're gonna try to make you have a fandom. Like, why does Alex Ross need a fucking fandom like that? Like, I appreciate Alex Ross, but you don't need to have people that are hardcore Alex Ross aestheticians. Alex Ross aesthetics are the only thing I fucking love, man. And it sounds crazy, but I know damn well there's a motherfucker out there who is like obsessed with Alex Ross because they see themselves in Alex Ross and what Alex Ross represents. And like, I'm sure Alex Ross would be fucking weirded out if he really ever met that person in real life. But the gap between him and that person, that social media allows him to keep selling things at the rate that he's selling, with people then obsessing about him in ways that are the only ways that are going to bolster prices like that to support that type of cultish devotion. Because I'm not trying to pick on Alex Ross. I only say that because like I have Alex Ross appreciation videos coming across my YouTube now for whatever reason, and I'm like, oh, fuck, this is. But it's
Man,
like,
it's like people don't realize that there is literally a list beyond like totality like of comic book artists, and there's so many illustration styles that just to get stopped by the first one they come across that blows their mind, it's like, man, that's they're gonna run out of material to consume after a while. Then they have to go for the aesthetics because they're not looking for anything else. Even though there are like, I don't know, I think I'm getting like thousands of hits for comic book artists.
I mean, there's a lot of book artists, and unfortunately, there's not as many as I would wish there to be because like comic books aren't inherently a very profitable,
I mean, or even just
like,
illustrators. Like,
industry.
there are a lot of illustrators out there,
Right.
phenomenal illustrators, and some of them are fortunate enough to be to work with really good storytellers.
And so this is where I feel like a lot of illustrators use comic books as sort of marketing, where it's like, oh, if you get, a Black Panther and you know, uh I don't know, a Batman, and you're like, oh, I'm a Marvel and DC published artist, that's gonna get them commission work potentially, but also gonna get them other illustration work that for one-offs is going to allow them to charge more. So I think that's where I'm like, knowing that comic books just aren't that profitable for artists, but they continue to do it. They're, I I think part of it is like there's plenty of people who do it for the love of the art, but also I think then they're able to then support themselves through, like I said, commission work and selling. They're selling their style, which unfortunately then lends to that aesthetic cult mindset. Um, but part of it is like, before you have a name, it's really difficult for people to not be compared to somebody else. So even if you have your own, what could be the most unique art style, if you don't have a name, people are still going to compare you to somebody and probably going to be wrong about the comparison most of the time. So that's where I feel like a lot of artists have to sort of build their name on characters and not. And what I mean is like, you have to write for the big names. Like you have to write for the Batman and the Spider-Man and the Superman if you want people to actually know your name. Like you can't write for fucking Dazzler or Kitty Pryde or draw or do the ink for Kitty Pryde and have people know who you are. So I think that's where unfortunately we get this franchise, like the influence of franchises on how we consume art and then create a hierarchy within art has then drifted down to comic books. So then it becomes like 10 people that everybody talk about, when obviously there's tens of thousands of talented people and tens of thousands of different styles, but capitalism makes it very difficult to it's like, oh, is this like Jim Lee? Is this like Todd McFarlane? Is this like fucking Jack Kirby? And everybody's understanding of imagery is only then able to be uh, understood through things that they've already seen. Not even because they can't understand something new, but because they're not even trying to understand something new. They're not opening themselves to new artists being capable of bringing something to the table. And it's this weird, like, I hate the conservatory seeping into everything. Um, but it's like, oh, you're not part of the established higher, like the top of the hierarchy, and you must not be that good, because they would have found you already if you were that good. And it's this circular logic of what prevents new artists from getting proper acclaim for being as good as they actually are, unless you know who they are. it's so it's so stupid to say how circular, like, people can't appreciate art unless they know somebody else appreciates the art, and that artist has a name. It's so stupid.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the role of the conservatory, is to promote itself. And
For
so
sure.
if one's not part of that cycle, then they wouldn't even appear on the conservatory's radar. But then when, on the other end, there are entire cultures that are essentially unprofitable, and so they're not going to get any attention from capitalism either. Like, if you have a unified group of people who are willing to essentially pay their way to meet out in the middle of a warehouse and party, who makes money on that? Like, obviously, no one makes money on that, so it's not viable. And then there's this stuff that's like, has way too much of a religious theme, and in some regards, that can never be mainstream.
Well, it's weird though. I think you're right, and it's like, I don't, I don't. It's there's been times where, like, religious stuff breaks through the mainstream, but it's not because it's religious, but it's because it feels like it's not religious. So, like, do you remember when MC Hammer's "Pray"
Yeah.
was big? That's a fairly religious song
Well, there's a Joan
when you break
Osborne
it
song,
down.
"What If God Was One of Us," and that was all over the radio. That was like MTV, you know,
Well,
top 10 video
so
for months.
that one I feel like is religious but also philosophical. So I can also, like,
I think there's a
it
lot of
doesn't.
worship music out there today that is very carefully masked.
Well, and that's where I'm like, even if you break down the lyrics to that, I would be hard pressed for anyone to identify any actual individual religion that's being pushed in the "What If God Was One of Us" song. It's more of a, like, philosophical exercise, I think, to make people think about, like, many things, in terms of, obviously, we should be approaching, like, every interaction as if it's, like, gonna be an interaction that defines us as human beings. Even in that context, God may be more of a metaphor than really even be talking about God. So that's where I'm like, the way the song is presented, it it could be interpreted as religious, but it could also be interpreted as a pure philosophical exercise. Like, I don't know her religious views, so without doing the research, because it is abstract enough, there is the possibility for that interpretation. With pray, there's no there's no room for that interpretation. It's very explicitly about praying. Like it's not explicit about which God to pray to necessarily, but it's definitely explicit about praying to a God, like in a way where not being I know enough where I know Hammer was going through a Christian phase. He may be Muslim now, but he was definitely Christian at the time. So
I think,
knowing he was Christian, he was talking about a Christian God,
yeah,
and I know that, but it's not clear in the song. So this is where
I think
it's
worship music is all worship music. It doesn't matter who or what. It could be spiritual music, but it's definitely a much broader category than just like Christian music. And I think that's kind of how it evolved. It kind of found a way to mask itself in various situations because music production itself is, well, dramatically easier than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And
well, okay.
I think it's a lot like the ability for people to produce music and to write music has improved.
And so this is where like, okay, I would slightly push back on that in the sense of I think a lot of people do worship music drag,
That's
but
fair.
actual worship music you can only really find in a church. It's not going to be on a recording because part of worship music is the live aspect of it. Like you can find worship music at a revival, you can find worship music at a Southern Baptist church on Sunday. You can't find worship music on a record. And what I mean by that is once it gets recorded, it's like basically gospel music. And worship music is more than a style in the sense of like to me, and I only say that because I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, in that everything being played at church on Sunday isn't worship music. Like sometimes they're just singing hymns, and sometimes they're just doing like testimony singing, where testimony singing is like not the same as worship music. Like worship music is like more of a gospel music jam session that is there's the biggest thing to me that is necessary for worship music is the capacity for it to be flexible. And it doesn't have to be flexible to the audience necessarily, but it has to be flexible to itself, which is where the live aspect comes in. Because part of it is like, it's almost like James Brown, where if you like hit me and the band doesn't hit, somebody needs to be fired. And so this is where if somebody gets the Holy Ghost, the band has to reflect it. If somebody starts doing the Holy Ghost dance, if somebody starts like speaking in tongues on the mic, it's not in the audience. If somebody grabs the mic and starts speaking in tongues, the band has to like reflect that same energy. And so this is where an element of worship music is also like, again, to me, it don't even have to be Southern Baptist because every worship music session isn't taking place in the Southern Baptist church. There are some elements like if you ain't got a drum set, it's probably not worship music. If you ain't got a bass guitar, it's probably not worship music. And the only reason I say it like that is like I've heard worship music in white churches. I've heard worship music in black churches. I've heard worship music in Korean churches. So like it's not something that only black people do, but this is where gospel music as an industry has turned worship music into like this drag form that I think misses an important part of what it represents. Because part of it is like you can't really like just because you recorded a church service, like not to say that the Holy Spirit even exists. It's the same, it's the exact same concept as the happenings. Like You can't capture the fucking Holy Spirit on video. That's just not how it works. So like you have to be in the church when somebody catches the Holy Ghost to understand what's happening, because you might not believe in the Holy Ghost, but you can feel the hairs on your arms standing up because of the music and because of the bass and because of the fucking the reverb on the amp on the guitar. There's so many things happening that contribute to the feeling of what's going on during worship music beyond just the song, that I think if you don't go to these spaces and experience it, you're gonna think that it's just like a genre of music in the same way that like rock and roll is a genre of music. And to a certain degree, anything can be turned into that form of genre of like,
I think that's the goal of capitalism, though.
Right, exactly, which is where now you have punk rock music as a genre. You have punk rock music as an aesthetic, when the entire premise of punk was to deconstruct those things, and capitalism turned it into a formula, and now you got tartans and fucking spikes and fucking mohawks, and now you're punk. You play like out of tune, you got the drummer off beat, and now you're punk. And so like the idea of like something which was as pure as punk music getting turned into an aesthetic and getting turned into a genre, when it was explicitly born to in an attempt to deconstruct those things, is how I recognize capitalism does this to everything it can. It attempts to do this to everything it can. Worship music is not safe. It's no different. And it doesn't care about the sanctity of any church. It doesn't care about the sanctity of any fucking sanctuary. Do you remember when like they tried to make Gregorian chant music quote unquote popular, and it was like they were selling Gregorian chant music, and I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, what is happening? $17.99 for a Gregorian chant? Oh, wait, what? This all better be going to the church, right? It's going to the church, right? And then you find out it's not going to the church. So it's no, I'm okay. I'm happy on the one hand that like we're getting to a point where music is not becoming an industry, or is no longer being viable to go into music as an industry, because then it's proving that people are still doing it for the sake of music. And I think we're hitting that point with visual art too, whether it's like comic books or animation. And industry is making it seem like these things are no longer viable, but it's no longer viable for industry. That doesn't mean these things are going to go away. And so I think that's where I'm like, I think I do feel like we're seeing the death of a lot of industry, and it doesn't even matter what type of industry, whether it's like automobile industry or music industry.
I don't think the current paradigm for music production is the same as it was in the golden age of the big studios.
Not at all.
And I don't think that the version that's emerging and the version that's on the way out are actually analogous to each other, even though one has always attempted to be analogous to the real thing. And no matter how good the software gets and the corresponding hardware gets, it's still fundamentally it's different, because it's just not the same. They're not using the same tools. And I think that the industry that was built to support the surrounding support of the old industry itself really isn't even designed to handle this current iteration with streaming. And like, I mean, backline touring companies are always going to have a place because not everyone's going to even know what they need to facilitate a, a live sound event. That's still complicated, but the music is being made by individuals. I can't remember the last time I saw anything about an organically formed band that made it beyond like niche fame.
But did they care to?
Probably not.
And so that's where I'm like,
I don't think it matters. That's the thing. I think that's like
I feel like there's more of those bands that don't care to make it, and they're forming and they're playing, and it's like they actually care about playing the music and don't care about how many records they sell or how many people show up. Because the thing is, it's like
no, but
I've
that's
played to
I
one
think that's the
person
point.
before.
I think that's my point though, is that it's like this old system that existed is on the way out, and it's not
Yeah,
being
yeah.
it's not being passed on to anyone. There's a whole new paradigm emerging that's going to essentially a serious portion of this industry is going to age out, and not by actual age and not by choice. It's just because they learned how to do a different thing. That thing's probably not going to exist in the form that they were used to. A lot of the future that's being built is seems to be like, I don't know what the word is. It doesn't care about the way things used to be done. I think that's really
Well,
exciting. That gives me like more
yeah,
hope than
yeah,
anything.
yeah. And part of it though is like I feel like it's gonna be easier for people to do things and not feel like a failure because in playing in that night that I had to play, I didn't have to play. I played for one person. It was like when I realized the people before me were playing some like hard ass dubstep, and it basically drove everybody out of the club. And I was so mad. I was furious because I'm like, dude, do you guys not see everybody fucking leaving? There was like 150 people at the club at one point, and these motherfuckers literally drove out every single person. And so I was like, I was
People are
debating
leaving. What
whether
do we
I
do?
even
Let's go harder.
yeah, no, that's exactly what they did because it's like they didn't even look up. They were in their own world, and I'm like, they were up and coming dudes. Like, in the night they had basically secured the midnight spot because they were trying to like come up, and the guy who was running the night was like trying to help them out. So he gave them the main spot, and I'm like, I'm not worried about at this point, like I'm not trying to come up and I'm not trying to like blow up, and I'm still coming out for fun. I would definitely prefer if there were people there over like nobody. And so it was like if it started with nobody, it wouldn't have been so infuriating. But because I had to sit there and watch 150 people file out the door before I'm about to go on, when I'm like at the point I'm going on, nobody's there. And so I'm like, what do I like? It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'd much rather be home now at this point. And I'm like, what do I even want to fucking like play? But I'm like, you know what? I don't ever get to play on loudspeakers like this. So let me go ahead and just fucking play. And somebody wanders in. Basically, this dude wanders in and dances the entire set. And so I'm like, I'm fucking raging. I'm seething mad. I'm like so pissed the entire time, but I'm just like taking it out on my set, just like probably playing a new song every 30 seconds or every minute or whatever. just like, you know, giving this dude the best fucking performance he's probably ever going to see in his life because this dude he's watching DJ is so infuriated and so mad, but at the same time redirecting all of that rage into his turntables. So like now I'm seeing this dude just dance his ass off. And so I'm like, the fact that nobody else is seeing it makes me even more pissed. And I'm just like raging inside. I'm so mad. And like after I'm done, I like shook his hand. I'm like, dude, thanks for dancing. Thanks for staying around. And once he was out, I fucking raged on everybody that was still there. And like, I don't even feel bad for doing it because I didn't like punch anybody, but I like made them all feel bad for driving everybody out. And like, somebody spilled some beer on my shit. I was like, this is probably the closest I've ever been to like destroying, like full on Hulk mode. Like, oh, this one dude destroyed an entire club by himself and nobody could stop him. They had to call the police and they tased him and the tasers didn't do anything and they fucking shot him twice. And like, no, he wasn't on any drugs. This was like pure adrenaline. That's like the closest I've ever been to raging out. And so like that, where I'm like, I was so mad, but I like went home and like smoked a bunch of weed and fucking could then gain the perspective of like, it doesn't matter how many people were there. Like it doesn't really matter. Like that one dude didn't have to be there for me to enjoy myself. And like my not enjoying myself was completely my own thing. I could have just like enjoyed it because I've done it at other places. Like I've played at Bears for 3 hours and like the first 2 hours were to nobody, literally to nobody. And I wasn't, I was sitting there just sipping on beer, enjoying myself, not thinking any sort of anger. I'm just like going through tracks and like enjoying myself because I'm not seeing a bunch of people walk out because these dudes are playing a bunch of hard dubstep that nobody clearly likes. So like, I'm going to give myself the benefit of the doubt in that the rage came from these dudes pushing everybody out of the club. But being able to reflect on it as an artist, I'm like, as an artist, I was lucky to even have one person stay, listen, and dance their ass off, let alone, it don't have to be 100 or 150 or 300. I've played for a full crowd. I've done that before and had them dance. So it's not like something I've never experienced before. So I'm not craving that experience because I've never had it before. It was more so knowing what it could have been and then having those dudes basically ruin my capacity to do it made me then salty about something that like I didn't have to be. That thought never, like, if the club had been empty from the beginning, I never would have been upset that I had to play for or got to play for one person. So like my perspective shifted, and being an artist, I think, allows people to do things like that without feeling like a failure, because part of it is like, I didn't feel like a failure because I played for one person. I was angry that those people pushed everybody out. Like at no point was I feeling like a failure. I was just raging. And so knowing how much, like, I think in the moment I was thinking about like, if I had been somebody trying to like come up, that's where they basically fucked. I'm sure they went around and did this at other shows because they thought they were the shit and didn't talk to anybody who else was on the event. They showed up. These motherfuckers showed up right before they're about to play, and then played a bunch of terrible shit, drove everybody out and left. Weren't there before or after their sets. I fucking hate motherfuckers like that. I hate motherfuckers like that whether they're famous or whether they're not famous. So it's like that attitude, I already don't like that. So the fact that they came in and did that shit before my set, I was like, they are really lucky I had better self-discipline and didn't flip out. Like I was like, I would have broken some of their bones. That's how mad I was.
Man,
Like,
fortunately, it only took electronic music like, a decade to realize that nobody actually wants to listen to dubstep for that long.
mhm.
That, like,
Oh
at
my
best,
god.
people will tolerate hard dubstep for like maybe 32 bars at the most during the middle of like a really banging drum and bass set. Maybe 32 bars, maybe only like 16, because it can really only be like, you know, just kind of a dramatic effect type of thing. But it's definitely not the kind of thing where nobody wants to listen to machine noises for that long.
Nobody needs a whole set of dubstep,
Yeah, no one does. No
let
one.
alone 4 sets of dubstep.
Oh,
And knowing that, so even at the time, I would like drop dubstep in the sets, like depending on
yeah. There's a time and a
the
place for drum
crowd.
step and drum step and all the other variations of
Yeah.
bass music. They can all coexist, but man, hard dubstep. That's like it's like the most mathematical experimental music. What kind of grating noise can we come up with now? What other weird way can we modulate some other thing to make this sound slightly different from the previous track?
Well,
Just
that's a
enough.
perfect example. I loved drum step. I still do. But as a DJ, anybody who's ever tried to play drum step out, that clears dance floors. Like nobody wants to hear any fucking drum step because it's damn near undanceable, but it can also be really grating the longer it goes on.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I love drum and bass. I love good dubstep. I love drum step. But as a DJ, I keep my personal taste aside when I'm trying to actually keep people on the dance floor.
Yeah,
And
like
so,
drum step and then drum core. That's another one that's like unlistenable. Maybe 16, no, 8 bars total over the course of an entire set can be drum core levels of intensity. That's it. 8 bars spread out over the entire 57 minutes. That's it. Anything else is just uncivilized. I love that stuff. It sounds great when I'm listening critically because I'm looking for something that I can use as like, you know, an accent, purely atmospheric effect, like on that fourth channel that I never use. Just like, yeah, I'm gonna throw that in for a little bit. Yeah, it's like a guitar solo. Okay, it's done. Filter it out real quick, and nobody noticed. Good. I think that's the biggest problem with a lot of electronic music is when I listen to like uh, a drum and bass all stars, you know, whatever party that they cut into a bunch of episodes, hour long episodes, and it's like a DJ in the middle of a room surrounded by people. It's like the boiler room but for drum and bass, and they're playing every genre imaginable of bass music. Within a tempo range that maintains or builds the energy in the night because it's clearly one part of a party. And in watching them, I think I've been watching them in the right order because the crowd gets crazier and crazier, and their physical boundaries start to erode more and more until people are essentially like on the DJ booth. Actually, I saw one where the some guy who's just dancing his ass off hits one of the decks and it stops the music and everyone's staring at him. It's actually quite incredible. Like, never thought I'd see something like that. Like, I always figured that was the kind of thing that, in at least in these kinds of productions, they'd filtered out the that kind of behavior. But no, the booth isn't even sacred anymore.
well, it's like you get people who I don't know if they're drunk or drunk on narcissism and they get up there and start fiddling with whatever is, the person doing the music. Like yesterday, we were at the African World Festival and there were people playing drums and somebody in the crowd like went up and started hitting on one of the drummers' drums. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like Why do you
What?
think that it's okay to just start going and fucking playing somebody else's drum while they're in the middle of a goddamn performance? Which is where I'm like, when it happens, I think everybody just goes along with it. But I'm like, that's the dude that would go up and fucking hit a button on the DJ booth or on the turntable.
What does this do? Start, stop, doink. Uh, now there are definitely people who are still doing this because they love it, and I see it reflected in the kinds of performances that. So I've managed to actually filter out uh, pretty much every single AI generated mix or some mix that's not actually attributed to a human. You know, the stuff that says like insert genre, insert aesthetic, insert the word mix. So whatever genre aesthetic mix that YouTube had been trying to give me, if it doesn't have a name and I can't go to their page that leads to like a website that says, oh yeah, I'm actually a real human being and I do this for real. I'm not just, pumping out playlists. Um, some of that stuff is actually really cool because the technology to stream is just getting easier and easier to access. And it's like people have figured out how to do lighting really well in formerly absurd spaces. I think LEDs have a lot to do with it. Being able to dial in specific amounts of red and green into the room. That's like killer. I guess what I mean is that the quality of production for the individual at the end is improving pretty dramatically, especially cameras.
Well, I think part of it is the education though, because
Yeah.
like you're saying, you know, you can do a lot with the proper ring lights and fill lights and reflection or sheets and boards for reflection and umbrellas and all that where the the materials being cheap and accessible is one thing, but people understanding how to use those becomes like the difference between a professional looking set and or a professional looking um, product and something that just uses a bunch of expensive or not even expensive
Available.
fancy tools. Yeah, available fancy tools. And
Well, yeah, I mean,
that's
like
where
I
I'm
think like maybe two, three. No, it was pre-pandemic. I remember looking at a lot of configurations for YouTubers, and whatever their set was behind their desk, there was easily twice that amount of space in front of it just for cameras and lighting, so that the production itself had enough room to move around and be sort of flexible. But then in the last few years, it seems like these things have been moving up against walls, and then the lighting has become much more compact, but also the diffusion, the reflectors they use are superior, and like putting the analog to digital conversion in the microphone and then running that straight into the computer itself. Like in the old days, that was like a no-no because we couldn't just trust the conversion of a simple microphone. But nowadays, it seems like the microphones that are being designed for like home production are just incredible. I've got a broadcast microphone and I love the way it sounds, but when I listen to other microphones, and obviously there's only so much that can be ascertained from the filter of YouTube and traveling across the internet to be reproduced on a foreign set of conversion. But you can hear the difference in things. And some of these microphones like punch way above their weight in terms of like cost and value. And same thing with the cameras. Like every year when I look at like the output from consumer electronics shows, like the quality of lenses, and the lenses are getting physically smaller, and the quality is like going up still. And then computational photography or computational videography, these things are only going to be, improved with, um, you know, I, AI tools is the only real way I can think about it at this point, because computational photography has really just, experienced a, order of magnitude level of improvement with the inclusion of AI tools. It's interesting because I absolutely agree. I think that people are always going to create because it's in their nature to create. But with these tools becoming so much more accessible, I mean, short of actually going to the great lengths of building a giant room and building a giant light source and then using a gigantic imaging sensor through a giant lens, comparatively to what we have in our cell phones, that's like the only real territory where big cameras really even need to exist anymore. It's in the conservatory, and it's in the impossible studios that even academic institutions sometimes like don't deploy because there's just not enough need to do it.
Well, I thought part of the big deal or part of the reasoning for big cameras in the first place was to keep them steady.
Oh yeah, no, it's the physics of shooting.
Like I know some of them need longer lenses and have like really long lenses, but that's not necessarily what's causing the weight.
No, no, the weight distribution is always a factor. That's why in studios they use tripods to hold things still. But even then, like with a cell phone, I've got one of those DJI gimbal things. I don't think I've ever held my cell phone that still in my life. And it has like imperceptible movements to keep itself locked on target. I didn't realize that like my phone could engage in target tracking at that level. If our phones can do it, I wonder how easy it is to adapt that kind of technology to other things. Actually, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if some of the drones in Ukraine are running off of Android software.
Oh yeah, of course.
Target
Yeah.
acquisition.
I mean, which ones probably aren't?
uh, the
Like
the drones that cannot benefit from modern processing. The people who don't have modern phones. Lately, I've noticed that there seems to be like a lack of interest in a lot of the AI stuff, like the various online communities. Like I think it's Savit AI. There seems to be less activity there, and there seems to be less activity at Hugging Face, and I think it all kind of happened around the same time that OpenAI and Microsoft and Apple and Google. They I think they started. I'm pretty sure they started buying up technology or hiring people who were the absolute cream of the crop, and so that development is no longer happening in the open.
well, and the novelty's worn off,
Yeah,
so it's like I think also anyone who tried hiring AI for replacing any sort of creative output before is now having to go back crawling hand and on knee to the people that they thought they could replace and like, hey, sorry, can you work with us again?
and
And some of them aren't gonna want to do it. So
imagine trying to
I think that's where we're
replace
at.
an artist with a paintbrush. That's what it is. It's just a paintbrush. It's just a pencil. It's just a pen. AI is just another tool that an artist uses. I think that's the weirdest part, is that capitalism thought that they could replace artists. Like
Yeah.
it's like as if computer science could ever write something so elegant to replace an artist. Please. And like only in the hands of truly open-minded artists are we ever going to see something like generative image construction or whatever like do anything cool. It's just like when we hand AI music generation to the neophyte, they're not going to make anything interesting. But you give that to somebody who actually knows how to compose music, and they might actually come up with something really cool. Same thing with the animators. But it's really strange to me though that it seems like for a little while it's like they're really trying like really hard, and now like smartphones can do image generation no problem. And if it's not doing enough for you every day, you can just pay a little bit more and have a few more tokens to run. Like the best that capitalism could do with AI was turn it into a coin op prize machine. They couldn't even turn it into a really cool like casino game like they did with crypto. I think that right there just shows how creative that world really is.
Yeah, and they can't make it profitable now. So like what makes anybody think they can make it profitable later? Well, and what's funny is like they're going after industries that aren't really profitable.
Yeah.
Like
The margins aren't going to
animation
save
isn't
them anything.
profitable. Music music can be profitable, but only if you exploit every aspect of it and then have a bunch of merch. And it's not even really necessarily the music that's profitable. So it's like
Yeah, it's the sample packs and the sound libraries and the well sync
and the
licensing.
performances.
Sync licensing is profitable, but only to keep financing the personal studios of the composers who are also writing music for other people.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure how profitable that even is. Like I've only read about a few people who do sync licensing who are breaking like six figures and are consistently doing it year after year, because that's a market that just churns, and whoever the next person who with the sauce who graduates from music school, like they're gonna get a lot of offers because they've got all the attention now, and they can just wait for the next generation of creative people to churn out from the conservatory. But that's the Muzak side of music creation. There's only it's I think it's like, occasionally some song breaks into the mainstream from being in a TV show. That might actually be a more organic, a reflection of a more organic selection process than being fed what to listen to by Spotify or YouTube or does Pandora even exist anymore?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
awesome Pandora.
I haven't listened to
Um,
Pandora in so long. Wow, it's number two. When I do a search for Pandora, Pandora jewelry comes up first.
that's funny. I use Pandora over Spotify just because there's like certain artists that are on Pandora that aren't on Spotify. Like it's not that they have more underground artists; they just have different,
Yeah.
slightly different sets. So um,
The last time I was listening to Pandora with any regularity, I had two channels. One was alternative rock, and the other one was drum and bass. And then by the time I stopped using it, the alternative rock was pretty much all Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots, and drum and bass was essentially only Goldie.
that's funny.
Like it didn't understand when I thumbs down some neurofunk when I was trying to work, not when I was trying to like, you know, get all worked up. But when I was
Oh,
actually,
you probably had to put neurofunk in there because it was like they have neurofunk. I have like a
yeah, but
it's
after
basically a neurofunk channel.
I wasn't trying to have a neurofunk channel though. I'm pretty sure that I had like jungle, atmospheric jungle, and just drum and bass, but it kept giving me neuro.
Well, and that's what I mean. Like drum and bass is too broad of a category for
Oh yeah,
I think for any algorithmic driven platform anymore. In that there's just so many different types of drum and bass that
yeah.
it's gonna hit on every different genre of drum and bass if you put that in there. So that's where it's like, yeah, um, I just straight up had like a neurofunk station. It's like, um,
That's another one that you can only have like 32 bars of neurofunk spread out over the course of an entire set. No one actually wants to listen to an hour of neurofunk unless they're doing critical listening for selection, for track selection. That's the only reason anyone would ever do that to themselves. Or maybe because they just discovered it and it's like their current favorite thing.
well, and that's mainly the fault of neurofunk for sounding mostly the same, or anybody in that genre, because it's like you hear obviously they're going to use an almond break, um but everybody wants to sound it's like they pick
They have that weird
somebody.
helicopter tractor thing going on in the background. That extra machiney sounding sound. All those other it's like the hardcore dubstep of drum and bass. It's the heaviest of heavy metals of drum and bass. Can only do it for so long though.
Yeah, like I don't know if you ever listen to Paradox and Nucleus. um I think it was Nucleus, but Paradox is like one of my favorite neurofunk artists, and it'd be like after a while all the songs fucking sound the same. Like if
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep it real, he's still one of my favorite artists, and I've seen him live. But again, it's like you're saying, certain genres of music, they just are gonna sound the same after 20-30 minutes. And so um i'm not I'm not oblivious to this type of shit, which is where when I would mix drum and bass, I would try to go through different genres, because it's like raga. You can't listen to raga for more than fucking 10 minutes. It all sounds the same.
Raga is one of those things like 16 bars across the entire hour of performance.
Right.
It's a different type of guitar solo. It's not to be endured. Nobody wants to listen to sirens for more than like a few seconds, because then you start looking around and worrying about shit. Like, what's going on? Is there a fire? Are the police here? What the fuck? Is that an ambulance?
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.